titled Innovation/Risks in Research During Duterte Rule in the Philippines. So take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Zach. May I just ask my team members to also turn on their camera? And for this symposium, just for everyone to know the format and the flow, we have planned a live discussion to begin the session. So we will speak for maybe the first 20 or 25 minutes, and I will allow you to meet the panel, the group of researchers who have conducted the 4 papers, and they all fall, the way we've put an umbrella to it is that they are all within the current context of the Philippines under strongman rule of President Duterte. And then after we have this live discussion where I will moderate the session and I will be asking questions to our group of researchers, our team will play pre-recorded video presentations so that we are able to keep to the time. And that's around 24 minutes precisely. And that will allow us maybe another 10 minutes for an open forum or a discussion towards the end. So I hope that format is okay with everyone. And let me introduce our team for the first paper, which will talk about the Philippine War on Drugs. So during the period of Duterte as president, he institutionalized state-sanctioned violence, which we refer to as the war on drugs. And this paper will talk about the children and the adolescents who were orphaned by this war when people who use drugs were targeted and killed. And we have here Mira, Yusingco, and we have Mika Aquino. Okay. Hi, Mira and Mika, say hello.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here.
Oh.
Okay. And then we move to the second paper, which focuses on how sexist humor and misogyny were normalized during the presidency of Duterte. And in this particular paper, a woman politician was targeted, in order to delegitimize her. And we have here Angelique Villasanta.
Hi, everyone.
The third paper continues to the delegitimization of women in politics, and here through the use of memes. And so we have Jocelyn Nolasco.
Hi, everyone. Good day, everyone. I'm Jopai. Hi.
And to round up the symposium, we have a paper in the time of the pandemic and how in the beginning of the pandemic, there was no clear systematic response by the government, putting the country, in a state of helplessness as the president continued to use a war rhetoric to counter COVID-19. And so for that final paper, we have JR Ilagan and Camille Yusay.
Hi, I'm JR. Thanks for having us.
Hi, everyone.
So thank you for allowing us to share our research with you. We have entitled this session Innovations and Risks, and there will be 3 sets of questions that I will pose to our team of researchers, and they will share their insights following the order of paper presentations, as I have introduced them as well. Sorry. So to start with perhaps a point on reflexivity, I would like to ask our team, what made you study this topic or ask your research question, locating the study in the socio-political context of Duterte rule? And so why this paper in particular, given our populist president, given the strongman rule of Duterte, why this topic? Let's start with Mira and Mika.
Okay.
So-
Hi.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Mika.
Sure. So around that time, you have to understand that there was a lot of fear and despair everywhere around, because you would see in the news every day that so many people were being killed and targeted, and you would see that they would put signages on the bodies presented on that TV, signages that would say, "This is a drug user, this is a drug pusher." And and then you would, after that, you would hear people talking about, this person was not a drug user or a drug pusher. And so there was the sense of, oh no, I could be next, or a family member could be next, because anyone could become a victim, so to speak. So there was really a lot of fear from people. They didn't want to go out of their houses, and there was a lot of despair from just hearing the news and the stories of all of these people and children who were killed. So that is one of the reasons why we went with this paper, because when you are so full of fear and anxiety and you see all of this injustice, you would want to do something about it. And in a way, this was our way of trying to get around that, and also trying to help these people, that by giving them a platform by which they could express their experiences, all of that fear, all of that trauma that they had during that one single night in which a loved one was killed. And the thing is, because this was a kind of a state-sanctioned violence, you would have a lot of people who were disconnected from government services. Like, no one batted an eye, really. Like, if they would approach, there were no specific services that catered to them. And which is really sad, because we are already looking at a set of people who belong, in the lowest even social classes of the country. And so aside from the economic hardship, they would have to, struggle with their safety, their sense of security, and the grief from losing a loved one. Especially since a lot of these people who were killed, they are fathers, they are mothers, and half of the time, and if there were, users or drug, or they were the ones distributing drugs, it was usually because of an economic reason, right? So you would then have a lot of children who were orphaned, unable to even meet their basic necessities on a day-to-day basis, simply because they lost a father figure or a mother or their guardian who was their sole, breadwinner in the family. We also see a lot of kids being targeted, like teens in their teens being shot in broad daylight. So it was just very heavy. It was just very sad and frightening to see all of this happening around us.
Thanks, Mika. And
yeah.
we hear from maybe Mara, and then we proceed with the others. Thanks, Mika.
Well, for me, it's really simple. I just, this whole context of our president sanctioning the massive genocide of all of these supposed drug users or pushers, it's just really appalling for me. And with the way that he positioned these drug users, basically stripping them of any humanity, I suppose. By extension, that is also how people tend to sort of treat and see the people that they leave behind or their families. So for me, being involved in this research is basically just my way of trying to sort of say that they matter. The families, the people who were killed and the families that they left behind matter. And we want to share their stories to people. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Mara. Angelique?
Coming from the sharing of Mika and Mara, I guess what I have to say is that the Duterte presidency is such a striking political episode, actually, if you look at it as an episode. But maybe responding to the question as to why this particular episode of analyzing the sexist humor in online spaces targeting a woman politician, why that in particular, I felt it connects to me as a young researcher, as a young female woman researcher, trying to establish my legitimacy in a field and to see those jokes happening in online spaces about people attacking a woman politician based on her looks, her age, her femininity, or her lack of femininity really impacted me in that way. And So it's something that was interesting for me, not just from an academic lens, but also something that I felt like even as I go out and walk, for instance, like when I commute, when I go to work, to school, it's something that's always at the back of my mind. Like, how are people coding my body? How are people interpreting my female body? So that's it for me.
Thanks, Angelique. Chopay?
Okay. So in my case, so considering not only the political landscape of the strongman rule under President Duterte, we also need to consider the media landscape, no, of his administration. And under that media landscape, our Vice President Leni Robredo has been a constant victim of his insults from the directly from the president, not only direct insults from the president, but also insults down to social media devotees. Like Vice President Leni Robredo has been a constant victim of false information, negative coverage, and memes. And these memes would usually depict her as someone who lacks intelligence and speaks nonsensical statements. So that's my context. And so given that that's my way of making sense of this phenomenon is to ask the question of how memes could serve as tools to reduce the legitimacy of a government official. So that's for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Chopay. JR and Camille?
Yeah, so ours revolves around how Duterte considered COVID and tried to fight against it using war as a metaphor. And so by this time, it's important to understand that this was his fourth year into his rule. There was the war on drugs happening for 4 years at this time. And here we find ourselves again in the midst of another war. And so personally, again, I was just angry, I guess. It's like, are we just going to keep on using this rhetoric to attack or to address societal issues when clearly it doesn't work? So this was a way of showing that this war rhetoric doesn't work and that basically the way that the government is addressing things isn't working and shouldn't be done this way. So that was where I was coming from when I wanted to see what was happening here.
And so similarly with JR, it's also very, in a way, personal because at the height of the pandemic, I also personally felt helpless. I think everyone, I guess, around the world maybe did, but particularly for our context, given the background with the other speakers here, it's really about the strongman rule and how that has impacted so many responses or particular responses to several issues in our community. And for me, it's very anti-citizen, coming from the war on drugs alone and going through this, the pandemic, very anti-citizen, wherein there were a lot of responses that didn't make sense to me. So this is how I made sense of those things.
Thank you, JR and Camille. Maybe in the interest of time, I will focus on the innovation question. And then if we have space later on, we will go into the ethics question. May I ask, from your point of view, what you think is the main innovation of the study that you conducted, perhaps referring to theory or perhaps referring to methodology? So we can again do the round. Mara and Mika?
Okay. So one of the things that I believe we, because our paper, we used action research. And what's interesting about action research in this setting was that we did it with play and interspersing the concept, the games, and even a bit of the therapy in it as well, as we were also training as psychologists. So every time, right before we would gather data, we would build rapport with them by playing, and the reason for that is because we wanted them to have that safe space where they could be kids again. Like we were looking at children aged 12 up to like 17, and that was the first time in a long while that they had that chance to play. So we would do that with them, and then we would also talk about their experiences, how their family life was like before and after, and then just really building that trust. And also seeing them, think about what has happened, but also juxtaposing that with their present experiences, and then rooting themselves into the moment of, hey, I'm still here, I'm building these connections with new friends. And so that to me is like one of the contributions that our study has had, especially since this is a group of people who, the very sensitive and vulnerable group. So we had to consider as well their safety. So in terms of like keeping, whenever they go to the research area, we would ask, we would not allow any pictures to be taken. And then in our data sheets, we would always keep them anonymous. And also just having to also think about economic justice as well. So we know that these kids have been orphaned. We know that they're having trouble financially. So we provided them some financial assistance as well as food, because that was one of those things that they didn't have every day. So in a way, this was our way of, getting to hear their stories, getting them to speak out loud what has happened to them, and also getting them to have that sense of, for the first time in a long while, we belong somewhere and we're happy here. Yeah. So that, I think that's one of the main contributions of that study.
Thanks, Mika. Mara?
Well, that's basically it, I think. The usage of that framework that we use, the games and all of that, and sort of incorporating that intervention and the treatment within the research data gathering procedure also, which, I think we can learn more on later when we present the videos. I think that is the innovation that we really focused on this project. So I think she covered everything, so I won't add any more in the, to conserve the time.
Thanks, Mara. Angelique?
Okay. I'm not sure if this is much of an innovation, but it feels like an innovation for me. In the paper that I will be sharing, we actually use data mining and topic modeling to sift through the numerous online comments that we were able to harvest in relation to the social episode that we examined. And we also explored sexist humor through a discursive lens, and to unpack the process really of how it leads to delegitimization. So we saw that it starts with the feminization, and that is about like sifting through what are the cultural discourses of how Filipino women should be like, how that leads into dehumanization and eventually into the legitimization.
Thank you, Angelique. Jopay?
Yeah, hi. Okay. So if Angelique's the study of Angelique's paper is more of a methodological innovation, mine is more of theoretical, like using the lens of positioning theory, specifically the application of positioning triad in the analysis of memes. In the analysis of memes as speech acts. It provides a novel analytical lens to the study of memes as tools to delegitimize a government official. So in accordance with positioning theory, memes are conceptualized as speech acts. And as speech acts, memes are not simply describing a government official in derogatory terms, but they are accomplishing things, they are performing an action. And within the context of politics, they're accomplishing a political act. So when we conceptualize memes as acts of positioning, therefore memes that position a government official as unfit for public office, they can call for her removal from office. And also, I think another major theoretical innovation and theoretical contribution of the study is the action orientation of words. So we can see here how the power of written words and text. And through words, we can actually delegitimize a government official by stripping them of their right to hold public office. And okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jopay. JR and Camille?
Yeah, so basically, again, we use the collective symbolic coping within the social representation framework as a means of making sense of the government's response. And so in doing this, what we tried to do was tracking how these representations changed across time, which I think is fairly novel in itself, but also trying to argue for using the president's speeches as a representative of the government collective. And I guess in terms of the Global South contribution, I guess we've seen this across when societal issues are represented as wars, and how in our particular case here in the Philippines during Duterte's rule, how this representation, which is again discursive in nature, had material implications, wherein we saw that the enforcing of quarantines, militarized checkpoints, police officers going around with guns. I mean, again, we see here, we wanted to show that, I guess something novel here is how really the discursive can be made material, especially when someone or an institution with so much power shapes the way that people talk about certain things. So there.
Thank you, JR. With that, let's proceed with the actual paper presentations. I'll ask Angelique to share the videos, and then we will return to the session and continue the discussion.
Hi everyone, my name is Mira Yusingco, and I have with me Nika Aquino, and along with Dr. Mira Ofreneo, we're here to present the first paper in the symposium. The title of our paper is Remembering Love, Memory Work of Orphan Children in the Philippine Drug War. Okay, so the context of the study is in 2016, Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte enforced the Oplan Tokhang to battle the so-called threat of drugs in the country. So far it has killed more than 30,000 people, orphaning hundreds of thousands of children. Effects of war on children's social and psychological well-being are very much well documented. So some of the things that are associated with exposure to war are things like higher rates of PTSD, depression, anxiety, and possibly higher rates of externalizing behavioral issues, to say the least. So governments and communities are now urgently called to action to protect these children with care and restore their dignity. However, 6 years later, the unique needs of this group of vulnerable children remain unaddressed by the government. And such an absence not only silences, but also devalues the plight of these children and also risks turning a blind eye to the state-initiated violence while displacing accountability and social responsibility to care for them. So with this, recognizing the mutual constitution of care and justice, we used memory work as a critical methodology framework to unpack Filipino orphan children's stories of Tokhang. So following a participatory action research design, our group partnered with community volunteers from faith-based organizations to conduct a 3-day memory work exercise with 6 groups of male and female participants ages 11 to 18. And integral to this action research was the creation of a safe space where these youths could feel free and yes, safe to be children again. So we incorporated games, arts, and expressive arts into the first day so that we could build a rapport with the kids as the facilitators, and also the children can also build a rapport and comfortability with each other. And then we move on to the data gathering proper, or the sharing, the narrative sharing portion of the 3-day affair. Okay, so for the phase 1, we had individual sharing and analysis, and the storytelling was divided into past, present, and future. And then in the phase 2, there was a collective analysis. So the children talked about what they made sense of, or how they made sense of their experience together. And this was synthesized by the facilitators. So the facilitator synthesized the themes and presented it to the children. And on the 3rd day, the teens were asked to engage in a collective process of rewriting their memories towards imagining a future for themselves and their families and communities. And they were allowed to express it in any type of expressive art, like role play, drama, song, dance, etc. Okay, so what came out of this data gathering? So we have here the overarching themes that we were able to gather from their narratives. So the subsections here, represented by the spheres, show how young children attempted to reclaim stripped agency in the loss and injustice in the past, as represented by the home shattered in darkness, and how they held into crippled agency in the sadness and insecurity of the present. So the home buried in hardship and sorrow. And lastly, how they carried on with hope to reimagine healing and justice, not only for themselves, but their families and their nation as well. So the hope of rising in a new home. So let's go through each of these themes. So in the past, the narratives that surfaced told the story of agency that's stripped, stripped agency. Beginning with a nightmarish loss, the young participants recounted their traumatic experiences of witnessing or hearing of their parents or family members' violent death due to tokhang. The young participants also described the experience of being engulfed by a nightmare as represented by this quote here. Oh, that a nightmare that they can't seem to wake up from. So evident in their narration was also the referencing of the brutality of armed men, some specifically identified as police, sieging their homes, accusing their loved ones of not only using drugs, but also retaliating, and were eventually killed with no mercy. So the destruction was felt psychologically and materially, as the physical home that safely held their emotional life as a family and shared agency was now all lost and shattered due to tokhang.
The aftermath of tragedy forced these children and their families to grapple with their surging painful emotions of loss and sadness amidst the struggle for daily survival as food became harder to come by. Families fell deeper into poverty. Children barely in their teens had to find work and step in as providers. This was their struggle to reclaim their agency in the present. The fearful images of police and local government authorities continued to pervade their communities, sowing distrust and suspicion, as anyone, even their childhood friends, can be assets, will exchange their names with the police for a fee. Despite all of this, the children continued to hope for a better future, which they held closely within the present time. Unique to their story is the hope of one day rebuilding a new home where the entire family can be reunited. They cling to hope, their driving force to reclaim their agency and rebuild a home that is safe, dignified, free from physical threat or economic insecurity. In wishing for the killings to stop, they search for justice and peace beyond themselves and their families. They see a possible future with a changed system within the police and for good governance within the nation, one that has a restorative drug policy in place for the war on drugs to end. Their sense of agency is tied to systemic change, that the rebuilding of the self requires a rebuilding of the home and consequently the rebuilding of the nation, to dream, to be free of want, to be free of fear, to live with dignity. In the face of structural non recognition, to care means listening to stories of the marginalized as an act of remembering love, rooted in our human capacity to care for and with others in suffering, while immersed in a space of honesty and courage. We recommend stronger collaborations among expanded communities of care who lobby the rights and welfare of Filipino children orphaned by tokhang, integrated into the legislation of a national orphan policy. To care means continued critical public education and memorialization as ways to legitimize what happened to these children and establish accountability. Analyzing the memories of Tokhang brought into light the nature and gravity of loss, the rupture of the physical, psychological, social, economic, and temporal aspects of being and feeling at home. To seek healing and justice for Filipino children orphaned by Tokhang and families left behind means cultivating spaces to realize their dream to reconnect as a family, to fight for and with other victims, and to attain social peace. In remembering their stories, we remember love through and past the pain. In restoring their homes, we restore security to a shared future as people with fervent hope in the ruins of war. This is a call to remember love.
Good day. My name is Angelique Villasanta, and on behalf of my research team, it is my pleasure to share with you our study. Let's begin. During the regime of Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, local and international media critiqued his sexist and misogynistic actions and language. In this study, we analyzed the sexist and misogynistic talk in one particular episode among multiple episodes in his regime. We analyzed the discursive episode surrounding the Dilima sex video issue. Last December 15, 2014, then Secretary of Justice Laila de Lima ordered a surprise raid in the new Bilibid prison, which revealed the proliferation of drug trade inside the facility. 2 years after, President Rodrigo Duterte identified her as the head of the prison drug trade. Then 2 months after, she was further implicated when her previous bodyguard testified that he saw 2 sex videos of her with her driver, who is the alleged bagman of the prison operations. Experts view her eventual arrest and detention as a way to persecute her for her vocal opposition to the extrajudicial killings related to Duterte's war on drugs. Duterte was one of the main characters in this discursive episode. He attested to seeing the video and threatened to show it to the public, including the Pope. He talked about her propensity for sex, called her crazy, and said that if De Lima was his mother, he would shoot her. Another character in this episode is the general online public. For this research, we analyzed how the general online public participated and shaped the discourses surrounding this issue. We analyzed 3,612 online comments on news posts about this episode and conducted topic modeling through latent lyric reallocation to assist in identifying themes in the dataset. Results of the LDA identified storylines in relation to name calling and disgust. Through the lens of discursive psychology, we understand that talk is action, that words do something, and in this episode, what are sexist and misogynistic comments doing? We conceptualize and analyze this episode through Slocum Bradley's positioning triangle. Through this lens, we sought to identify storylines present in the talk, positions within these storylines, and the social forces of the discursive acts. We asked the following research questions. In our analysis, we identified two overarching storylines. The first is this: a fat and old woman having sex is an animal. This storyline evoked the positions of fat, old, and animal, and we see that in the following data extracts. Your shameless ballena whale, queen of doggy style. If Delima has a video, don't show it, she's wrinkled already. It will make a lot of people vomit. You're disgusting, Delima. You look like a crazed frog in the sex video. In the storyline, fat and old women are positioned as undesirable, disgusting, and animal-like to evoke laughter. The utterances has the social force of making women's weight and age subject to evaluation and making women comparable to animals and making sexism acceptable through humor. The public gains the right to disrespect women and women lose the right to be respected as a woman and as a person. The second overarching storyline is this: a woman politician with a sex video is a moral threat. She is positioned as evil, hypersexed, and predatory, and we see that in the following extracts. You're all wasting your time degrading the Senate with this demonia, grandma. Senate whore Delima, a portmanteau for Delima and Halimao, meaning monster, is denying the tape, so now they lost their appetite. Maybe she held her partner at knife point, that's why he agreed. She turned her driver into a sex slave. In these utterances, a woman politician having sex is positioned as corrupt and unfit to hold office. The utterances evoke laughter, make sexism acceptable through humor, and delegitimizes her as a moral threat to the state and nation. The public claims the right to disrespect women, to challenge her legitimacy, and to call for her resignation. Ultimately, she loses the right to be respected as a woman, as a politician, and loses her legitimacy as a state official. Aside from unpacking how sexist humor was utilized to legitimize a woman politician, this study further highlights the difficulty of countering sexist humor, and so I leave you with the following reflection questions. How do we challenge sexist jokes in online spaces? How can one claim the right to be respected? How can we demand the duty to not be made an object of laughter? And how does one call out sexist humor as sexism? Thank you so much for listening.
Good day, everyone. I'm Jocelyn Nolasco, and on behalf of Dr. Mira Ofreneo, I will present our paper entitled The Mean World of Lenny, Memes as Tools for the Discursive Delegitimization of a Government Official. So let us begin. President Duterte is known for his strongman rule, and strongman leaders are authoritarian and categorical thinkers, dividing the world between us versus them. Public denunciation is also part of his style of rule. He often lashes out at his critics, insulting and accusing them of sabotaging his administration. During his administration, Vice President Leni Robredo, his constitutional successor and the leader of the opposition, has been treated as a political outcast. Despite being the legitimate and elected vice president, she was not included in the administration's cabinet meetings and was the constant subject of insults from the president. He repeatedly belittled her capabilities in his speeches. He called her a grandstanding and scatterbrained leader of the opposition who could not be trusted with classified information. The disrespect, denigration, and the legitimization of Vice President Robredo came not only from the president, but from his social media devotees. Since taking office in 2016, she was a constant victim of memes and fake news. And the memes usually depict her as someone who lacks intelligence and speaks nonsensical statements. So what are memes? Memes are defined as a group of digital items that share common characteristics of content, form, and stance that are circulated, imitated, and transformed by many participants through digital participatory platforms. Content refers to the topic or what the meme is about. Form refers to how a meme is presented, whether textual, pictorial, or audiovisual. Instance refers to the information it conveys. Memes exist in a variety of digital forms, including email, text, images, videos, songs, and hashtags. The focus of this study is the image macro meme, which consists of an image or picture with a brace or top or the bottom of the image. It sets up the stance of the meme. Okay. So we use positioning theory as a framework for understanding how memes function as tools to delegitimize a government official. Positioning theory draws upon speech act theory, the recognition that we use language not only to communicate information, but to accomplish or do things. Hence, language are speech acts. While speech acts usually refer to utterances of spoken words, it can also apply to written text like the textual component of memes. Memes, therefore, not only function to share information, they also accomplish or perform tasks. And using the lens of positioning theory entails the application of the analytical framework, the positioning triad. So each of the memes in this study, we analyze it by identifying the position, how the government official was positioned, the storyline, and the social force. Social force refers to what is accomplished on utterance, and utterances contain two distinct forces. The illusionary force, which refers to what is the talk doing? Is it insulting, blaming, accusing? And perlocutionary force refers to the social consequence, effect, or outcome of talk. And we asked these research questions. What are the storylines of memes targeting a government official? How is the government official positioned in these storylines? And what are the social forces accomplished by these acts of positioning? For our data source, the most popular memes in terms of number of interactions were collected using CrowdTango, and the time frame was from June 2016 to August 2020. From a total of 1,544 posts, the top 200 memes were considered. The final corpus was made of 55 memes in image macro format, and the online comments elicited by the memes were also considered for analysis. Okay. And the analysis revealed how memes uniquely positioned Vice President Leni Robredo following 6 clusters of illusionary forces and storylines. First, insulting her competence. So she was positioned as an idiot, stupid, dumb, ridiculous, talks nonsense. Criticizing her character, she was positioned as a hypocrite. And trivializing her work, she was positioned as useless. Accusing her of electoral fraud, she was positioned as a fake vice president, liar, cheater. Criminalizing her, accusing her of treason, she was positioned as a destabilizer and traitor. And calling for her removal from office, she was positioned as an impeachable official. And similar utterances can be found in the comments elicited by the meme. Some sample comments elicited by the memes were, okay, she has a malnourished brain, hypocrisy at its finest, plastic, she's too shallow and pathetic, pathological liar, worse than a thief, traitor, hashtag imbecile, hashtag termite, big disgrace. So the comments were consistent with the illusionary forces of the memes. So in these negative portrayals, consequently, strip her of her credibility as a government official. And to summarize, memes targeting BP Leni had unique illusionary forces and storylines. And each storyline had unique positions and social forces, positioning her as stupid and making her an object of laughter, to positioning her as a fraud and making her the object of contempt. Memes work together to produce the overarching social force of delegitimizing a government official. And to conclude, memes as speech acts are not simply describing a government official in derogatory terms, but are performing an action. In the context of politics, they're accomplishing political acts. Memes as acts of positioning can limit what actors can say or do, and as demonstrated in the study, memes positioning a government official as unfit for public office can call for their impeachment or removal from office. Hence, the theory asserts the discursive power of memes. And so, thank you for listening.
Good day and thank you for having us. Today we'll be presenting our paper entitled The War We Cannot Win, Social Representation of the Philippine Government's Militarized Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic by me, Jonathan Ilagan, Dr. Camille Yusay, and Dr. Mira Ofreneo. So as I'm sure we might have all noticed, each country's leader took differing approaches to addressing COVID-19. Some took a public health approach, while others took draconian measures such as lockdowns. And so, given Duterte's strongman tendencies towards leadership, of course, he took a militarized approach anchored on a metaphor of war when trying to make sense of COVID-19, which involved nationwide lockdowns, armed borders, and jailing quarantine violators. So, we used social representations theory as our framework to try to look at how the Philippine government made sense of the virus during the first 6 months of the pandemic by using nationally aired speeches of President Duterte as our main data source. Given Duterte's role as president of the Philippines, we argue that his speeches can act as a representation of the national government's way of collectively symbolically coping with a novel phenomenon that is COVID and how they responded to this threat. As researchers, we tried to make sense of this by looking at the metaphoric anchoring that the government used to make the unknown more comprehensible, one of which we found was that this was anchored on a war. But we also tried to look at how Duterte positioned or attributed particular actors and thus used role attribution to make sense of this a bit more. We then later on juxtaposed these discursive representations from the material responses that actually occurred. So on screen, you can actually see the different research questions that we had, and I'll be calling on Dr. Yusay to give you some of the highlights of our results from our findings.
Thank you, Mr. Ilagan, for the introduction. This table summarizes the metaphorical representations of COVID-19. The use of public health emergency metaphor appeared in the beginning of the pandemic only to disappear through time. This metaphor will reemerge later on, fused inside a metaphor of war. On the other hand, a public order metaphor was consistently used in the first 6 months, evolving through time as a martial law of discipline, a war, and a war we cannot win. This ultimately defined the government's militarized response to COVID-19. Alongside the public health emergency metaphor, which seems to be a common representation of such diseases, interestingly, COVID-19 was also represented by the Philippine government as an inevitable yet unalarming natural cleansing. In this metaphor, COVID-19 was framed as part of a natural and inevitable process of life and death, anchored on folk spirituality and fatalism. In this metaphor, nature was the uncontrollable villain and there were no heroes. The consequent material response of government was unclear and absent. At the start of the pandemic, President Duterte referred to COVID-19 as an inevitable natural cleansing, having no solution, alongside the other metaphors such as health and public order that eventually evolved into a war. And in its dominant representation of COVID-19 as a metaphor of war, President Duterte referred to it as a war we cannot win. With this representation, the government offered no clear strategy of winning the war. It offered no clear solution, with no hope of winning the war against COVID-19. The Philippine government clung onto material responses that focused on limiting the movement of people and enforcing public order. With this, using social representations enabled us to highlight how governments, as collectives, not only anchor their sense-making of COVID-19 on medical science, public health, and expert knowledge, but on metaphors that can have severe consequences. In this case, the national government's social representations anchored on fatalism and helplessness that led to a lack of a clear response to managing the virus, its transmission, and its effects. In this study, it highlights the importance of anchoring on science, public health, and expert knowledge to inform life-saving and health-saving material responses. A public health perspective was and is continuously being used by countries who have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic rather successfully. The impact of representing COVID-19 as a war that cannot be won left Filipino citizens feeling helpless and powerless, given the palpable absence of the government and the emotional disconnection of its leader. That's all for now. Thank you for listening to our presentation.
Thank you. I hope you are still with us. We bring it back to the session. And perhaps we can open to questions. Or even comments and responses or reactions. So please feel free to put on chat or to unmute. I think we have around 13 minutes or so for a discussion. So again, thank you to our speakers for presenting their papers.
Thank you, Mira. I'm quick to jump onto the discussion. All the studies are so exciting and so interesting. And I like the video clips. I was thinking that I was going to use, I was looking for materials to get my students to start thinking in very innovative ways. And these videos are very good. Really, most of this innovative techniques that you're using, we are also interrogating here. And the questions that we have behind our minds are some of the things I'm going to share with you right now. Like, for instance, Jopi, I like your looking at the whole idea about memes and all that, but how do you pick which memes to look at? Those are some of the questions that, I would like to ask. And also with Angelique as well, what online discourses? Because there was once we are, at the moment right now, we are on strike, academic staff are on strike, and there are a lot of things, a lot of debates going on among professors about what is happening, government disposition to a lot of things. And sometimes you want to look at the narratives and just analyze what they think. But sometimes you also look at what kind of narratives you look at and how much bias that are inherent in the kind of your selection. So like the public discourse, for instance, I get my students to look at that as well, or even as class exercises to see what people are saying about what, but then how do you handle the whole idea about the biases and what to select? Because there are quite a lot of discourses online, particularly in countries like ours where there are no other outlets except through online discourses, and then with the speeches of the government. Just recently, we were looking at, fellowship awards in African qualitative studies as well. And people who talked about the speeches, we know that most of our governments, the speeches are written for them. But then it also reflects to some extent, though, their disposition. So it's a kind of, you weigh those, and incorporate that into the limitations of the study. So these are some of the comments that I have. I'm really excited about your studies. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bola. Let me start. Let's start with Jopay, and then perhaps Angelique can respond to the questions. So, and then end with JR and Camille. Go ahead, Jopay.
Thank you, Bala. Yes, the way I chose the memes in terms of the number of interactions. I chose the ones with the highest number of interactions, and also I chose the memes in terms of the format, as long as they're in terms of image macro format, and they have the photo of our Vice President Lenny Robredo, and they involve name calling and some also name calling and describing her in derogatory terms. So that's how I chose the memes.
Thanks, Jopay. Angelique.
Similar to what Dr. Jopay shared, the articles where the comments were from were also chosen based on the number of interactions. So in Facebook, it would be the likes, comments, and shares, and all comments were initially scraped. But it was a lot and it was unmanageable. So I do resonate with you, Bola, when you share like how do you analyze such a big data set? Initially, we had 3,600 comments, and that's where topic modeling, the data mining and topic modeling was useful to help us conceptualize the research and arrive at the final version of the research question. because in those comments, there were a lot of different angles, different sentiments that were being shared in the comments. But for this particular research, we were intentional that we want to focus on analyzing comments that were sexist in nature and that were kind of perceived to be humorous. And I know that can be a bit contentious now because sometimes some of the audience would say, oh, that's not funny. But in that context, it had a ha 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 or a laugh emoji that was a clue that it was spoken to elicit laughter. So it really is about managing the data set and clarifying what's your focus and what are the limitations of your research. So maybe for me, we had to let go of the counter talk. And we said that, oh, maybe that's for another research.
Thank you, Angelique. JR and Camille?
So for the context of the speech, during that time, at the height of the pandemic, the Office of the President would usually air or have live speeches. So it's not. And during that time, it wasn't pre-recorded, right, JR? It was live speeches, and it's very candid. And he would, it would be scheduled every week. Then at this, eventually after a few months, he wouldn't do it anymore. So we would check out, during this time, you would check out the transcriptions, which is readily available in the government website, right, JR?
Yeah, and well, I do think that portions are really pre-written to begin with. However, Duterte has this tendency to just speak on his mind, what's on his mind, and ramble and start, swearing out of nowhere.
Yes.
Just saying the dumbest things. So you could actually catch, what was in the speech, what was pre-written versus what he wanted to say. And again, the whole transcription was there. So we had the timeline of the first 6 months and looked at those nationally broadcasted speeches because they were in a way like a state of the nation address specific for COVID. And so we had access to that. And, fortunately, the transcriptions on the presidential website even had his ad libs. So everything was there and we had access to that.
Thanks, JR and Camille. Maybe there are more people who would like to give a comment or a response or a question.
Yes, if I may, kind of comment and then a question. First, I just want to thank you for doing this work. I think it's really brave in the political climate and also powerful, and it serves a really good example of how academic work can be, serve as political action and make a real difference in the world. And also a thought that I had is that it's really fascinating how these sort of discursive patterns are, I see them as very similar to what occurred in the United States under the Trump administration. And the utilization of memes and these weaponizing gender discourses. But a question that occurred to me surrounding this analysis of memes, and I agree that looking at them discursively is a really fascinating approach. But do you think there's potential for them to be used, memes, for progressive political ends?
Thank you, Zach.
Yes, I think yes. As much as you can use it to delegitimize a government official, you can also use the power of memes actually to influence public opinion and also to use it for pro-social behavior. Yes. And that would be maybe a good topic for another research or another study. Yes.
Thank you for that. If I may add, we actually have some researchers who have done work on how certain groups, let's say movements, have responded to, let's say, Duterte, to let's say counter the sexism and to position women as powerful, as able to combat sexism. And so we've had hashtag Babae Ako, which is like I am a woman. We've had hashtag Every Woman in relation to the Lima case. So we've had these pockets of, in a way, social movement or activism. Even with the last election with VP Lenny, There was a call for what was called in Tagalog, radical magmahal. It is radical to love. So that was an attempt to counter hate speech being propagated by the memes. So it would be interesting if social movements would really utilize, the same set of tools, perhaps, no. But we do see really the power of the discursive to shape material reality and to have material consequences.
It would also be helpful to see the power of this reactionary or counter memes or narratives and stuff. So that would be very interesting to see too. Thank you.
Can I add one other thing, because I think we still have 4 more minutes or 3. Because as fascinating as the different studies that you conducted, all under a very similar umbrella, as fascinating as they are in terms of a contribution to the political situation in the broader sense. Well, there's another fascinating part of it, and I think that's where you have a range of qualitative methods here sitting side by side. And of course, I was also thinking along those lines, not only positioning analysis or a particular branch here, but you work with storylines. And I was wondering sometimes how much storylines, the tradition of analyzing storylines is now being replaced or by thematic analysis. So there is a parallel here, but I think also there are some differences to sort this out. Then metaphor analysis, I think, is another very powerful tool that is under-researched, underrepresented, and then also meme analysis. So you have a bunch of different methodologies, in a way at least, or different methods, if you want to use that term, sitting side by side, and having them in such an exciting research team. I mean, you must have had discussions across these ways, and I mean that would be fascinating for me or for other people also to be part of. How did you become experts in particular ones, but at the same time were able to communicate across these, I would say, slight differences, but nevertheless, I think that's where there's a lot of potential for reshaping. Let's call them tools, these tools, and contribute and share them, as you did here so successfully, with a larger community. So thank you again. I think that was a terrific way of contributing to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. I know we are already at the end of our hour. So just to quickly respond and say that the group presenting here is not one team. So they are representing different teams. And perhaps what brings them together is that they are all part of our PhD cohort in our university, Ateneo de Manila, where we do talk about discursive psychology, critical approaches, and that's perhaps is what brings all of us together. That desire to do something that is transformative. And at the moment, these are the tools that we have or that we find are useful. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for joining.